was sitting on a cot in a tent in Kuwait, sand still stuck to my boots, when my phone buzzed with an email from a law office back home. I remember opening it standing up, like some part of my body already knew I needed to be ready to fall. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I read those 4 words maybe 6 times before they actually landed. My wife, the woman I'd been married to for 7 years, the mother of my 5-year-old daughter, had filed for divorce while I was 7,000 miles away, guarding a supply route in a country most people back home couldn't find on a map. I called her that night, and she picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice flat in a way I'd never heard from her before. "I can't do this anymore, Ryan," she said. "I can't keep being married to someone who's never here." I didn't say much back. What was I supposed to say? I just sat there in the dark, phone pressed to my ear, thinking about the box sitting under our bed back home, the one she didn't know existed yet. She had no idea what I'd been doing with every single spare hour of this deployment. And in about 6 weeks, she was going to find out. My name is Ryan Coleman. I'm 34 years old, a staff sergeant in the Army, and I've spent the last 11 years learning how to carry weight most people never have to think about. Some of that weight is the kind you carry on your back during a ruck march. Some of it is the kind you carry in your chest, quietly, for years, without ever really talking about it to anybody. I met Sarah when we were both 19, working the same shift at a diner off the highway outside our hometown, back when neither of us had any real plan for our lives, beyond getting through the next paycheck. She waited tables, I washed dishes, and somehow, over the course of one slow Tuesday night when the place was basically empty, we ended up talking for 4 hours straight after closing, sitting on the tailgate of my truck in the parking lot. I liked her before I even really knew her, honestly. The way you sometimes just know a person's going to matter, before you've got any real reason to think so. There was something about the way she talked about her plans, her dreams, the nursing degree she wanted to get someday, that made me want to be part of whatever life she was building. We got married 2 years later, young, broke, and honestly not all that prepared for what marriage actually takes. We rented a tiny apartment above a laundromat for the first year, and I remember lying awake some nights listening to the dryers running downstairs, wondering how we were ever going to afford the life we kept talking about. I joined the Army when I was 24, not because I had some deep calling toward it, but because it was steady work, with steady pay, and benefits neither of us had ever had access to before. Sarah wasn't thrilled about it at first. She told me flat out she was scared of what deployments would do to us, scared of raising a family mostly on her own while I was somewhere she couldn't picture, and couldn't call whenever she wanted. I told her I understood and I meant it, but I also told her I needed her to trust that I was doing this for us, not instead of us. Looking back now, I think that was the first crack in something that never fully got the chance to heal. We had our daughter, Lily, 3 years into the marriage. She's the best thing either of us has ever made, and I mean that without any exaggeration at all. She's got Sarah's eyes and my stubborn streak, and every single time I've deployed since she was born, leaving her has felt like tearing something loose from my chest that doesn't grow back right. The years after Lily came along were hard on us in ways I don't think either of us fully saw coming. I deployed twice more, each time for 9 months at a stretch, and each time I came home to a wife who looked a little more tired, a little more worn down by carrying everything alone. Sarah's mother got sick during my second deployment, diagnosed with a heart condition that needed constant monitoring, and Sarah spent most evenings after work driving 40 minutes each way to check on her, on top of raising Lily basically as a single parent, while I was on the other side of the world. I tried to help from where I was. I called when I could, sent money home every check, wrote letters when the internet at base was too unreliable for video calls. But I knew, even from thousands of miles away, that trying isn't the same as being there. I knew Sarah was drowning in a way that phone calls and money transfers couldn't fix, no matter how badly I wanted them to. We fought more during my breaks between deployments than we ever had before we got married. Small things turned into big things fast. She'd bring up feeling alone, feeling like a single mother with a husband who existed mostly as a voice on a screen, and I'd get defensive instead of just listening, because some part of me felt like she was blaming me for choices I thought I was making for our family's future, not against it. When my current deployment orders came through, a 9-month rotation to Kuwait supporting logistics operations, Sarah didn't cry the way she used to when I left. She just nodded, quiet, and told me to be safe. I remember standing in our kitchen the morning I left, watching her make Lily's lunch for school, and thinking something felt different this time, something colder than the goodbyes we'd had before. I told myself it was just exhaustion. I told myself we'd figure it out once I got home. I had no idea how wrong that assumption was going to turn out to be. Lily started kindergarten that same fall, and Sarah sent me pictures of her first day, a little backpack almost bigger than she was, standing on our front porch with a gap-toothed grin. I remember staring at that photo on my phone in the middle of a dusty supply yard, feeling something twist in my chest, that particular kind of pain that comes from missing a moment you can never get back, no matter how many photos get sent to make up for it. Around that same time, Sarah's mother's heart condition started getting worse. More frequent trips to the cardiologist, a medication adjustment that didn't sit right at first and left her dizzy for weeks. Sarah handled all of it alone, driving back and forth between her mom's house, Lily's school, and her own job at the hospital where she worked as a nursing assistant while finishing up her degree part-time. I knew all of this from short phone updates here and there, but knowing about a hard season from a distance and actually living through it with someone are two completely different things. And I think some part of both of us understood that gap was slowly turning into something neither of us knew how to close anymore. About 4 months into the deployment, our calls started getting shorter. She stopped asking about my day the way she used to. I told myself it was just the time difference, the stress of managing everything alone again, her mother's health scares piling up on top of Lily's school schedule and her own job. I kept telling myself things would get better once I was home for good, once I could actually be there instead of just a voice crackling through a bad connection at 2 a.m. her time. Then, about 6 months in, the calls basically stopped altogether. She'd text back short answers. She'd say she was tired, that she'd call later, and later never really came. I remember lying on my cot some nights, staring at the ceiling of the tent, feeling something in my gut telling me this deployment was going to cost me more than the last 2 combined. I still didn't see the divorce coming. Not really. Not until that email showed up on a random Tuesday evening, my phone screen glowing in a dark tent while half my unit slept a few feet away. The email came from a law office I'd never heard of, subject line simple and cold, notice of filing. I remember my hands actually shaking a little as I opened the attachment, scrolling through pages of legal language that somehow managed to reduce 7 years of marriage down to a handful of clinical paragraphs about asset division and custody arrangements. I called Sarah that same night, even though it was the middle of the afternoon back home. She picked up on the 3rd ring, and I could hear Lily in the background, some cartoon playing on the TV, the normal sounds of a normal afternoon happening in a house I suddenly felt completely disconnected from. "I got the papers," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even though nothing inside me felt steady at all. There was a long pause on her end, long enough that I actually checked the call hadn't dropped. "I know you did," she finally said. "I'm sorry you had to find out that way, over email, while you're over there. That wasn't how I wanted it to happen." "Then why didn't you call me first? Why didn't you say anything before it got to lawyers?" "Because every time I try to talk to you about how I'm feeling, you get defensive, or you tell me to just hold on a little longer. And I don't have anything left to hold on with. Ryan, I've been holding on by myself for years now." I sat down hard on the edge of my cot, phone pressed so tight against my ear it actually hurt a little. "That's not fair," I said, though even as the words came out, I wasn't sure anymore if that was true, or if I just needed it to be true. "I'm doing this deployment for us, for Lily, for the house, for her college fund someday, for—" "I don't need money, Ryan," she cut in, her voice cracking for the first time in the whole conversation. "I need a husband. I need somebody in the room when Lily has a bad dream. Somebody to sit with me in the waiting room when my mom's having a cardiac scare. Somebody who's actually here instead of somewhere I can't even picture clearly anymore. I can't keep being married to someone who's never here." I didn't say much back after that. What was there left to say that hadn't already been said, one way or another, over the last 3 years of short calls and long silences? I just sat there in the dark tent, listening to her breathing on the other end of the line, feeling something break quietly inside my chest, the kind of break that doesn't make any noise at all. We talked a few more times over the following weeks, mostly logistics, mostly cold. She told me she still wanted me to be a good father to Lily, that none of this changed how she felt about that part of things. I told her I understood, even though understanding felt like the wrong word for what I actually felt, which was somewhere closer to drowning. I threw myself into work after that, the way I think a lot of guys do when their personal life falls apart while they're stuck somewhere they can't fix it from. I picked up extra shifts. I volunteered for tasks nobody else wanted. My battle buddy, a supply sergeant named Danny Ruiz, who'd been my closest friend since basic training, noticed pretty quickly that something was wrong, and one night, over bad coffee in the chow hall, I finally told him everything. Danny listened without interrupting, which is rare for him, and when I finished, he just sat there for a second, turning his cup slowly on the table. "You still got that plan you've been working on?" he asked. "The house thing?" I nodded. "Doesn't matter now, I guess." "Doesn't matter?" Danny leaned forward. "Ryan, that matters more now than it ever did. You're telling me your wife thinks you've spent the last 9 months being absent, being nowhere, giving nothing, and this whole time you've been quietly working every extra shift you can get your hands on to make sure that woman and your daughter are taken care of, no matter what happens between you two. That's not nothing, man. That's everything. She just doesn't know it yet." I sat with that for a long time after he left the table. He was right. In a way I hadn't fully let myself think about while I was busy drowning in the divorce papers. I had been building something this whole deployment, something Sarah had absolutely no idea about, something that was going to be waiting for her, whether our marriage survived this or not. Over the next few weeks, I kept working, kept sending money home, kept adding to the plan, even while the divorce process moved forward on paper. Some nights I sat on my cot and wrote letters to Sarah I never actually sent, because I didn't know how to say what I was feeling without it sounding like I was trying to manipulate her into staying. I wrote about missing bedtime stories with Lily. I wrote about the smell of Sarah's cooking, the sound of her laugh at something dumb on TV, the way she used to fall asleep with her head on my shoulder during long car rides before deployments started stealing all our ordinary evenings from us. I folded each letter up and put it in an old ammo can I kept under my cot, telling myself I'd give her the whole stack someday, when I could actually explain myself in person instead of over a bad connection that kept cutting out at the worst moments. I also called my mom during that stretch, mostly because I needed somebody to talk to who wasn't going to judge me for what was happening. She listened for a long time, and then she said something that stuck with me the rest of the deployment. "Ryan, showing up isn't just about being in the room. But it's not just about paying the bills either. She needs both, baby. You've got to figure out how to give her both, or none of the rest of it is going to matter in the end." I didn't have a good answer for her that night, but I thought about those words more than I probably let on. Here's what Sarah didn't know. Sitting in our kitchen back home, signing paperwork with a lawyer about splitting up a life she thought I'd barely shown up for. From the very first week of this deployment, I'd been putting almost every single dollar of my combat pay and hazardous duty pay straight toward our mortgage. We'd bought our house 4 years earlier with a loan that felt impossible at the time. A 15-year note with payments that stretched our budget thin every single month. I'd worked out a plan with a financial counselor on base before I even left, running the numbers over and over until I figured out that if I lived like I had nothing for 9 straight months, sent every spare cent home into a separate account Sarah didn't check, I could pay off almost the entire remaining balance by the time I came home. I hadn't told her, because I wanted it to be a surprise, something I could hand her the day I walked back through our front door, a mortgage-burning kind of moment, the two of us finally free of a debt that had been squeezing us for years. I pictured her face when I told her. I pictured Lily asking what a mortgage was, and both of us laughing about it. I never once pictured a divorce filing showing up in the middle of all that quiet planning. On top of the mortgage, I'd also opened a college fund for Lily, using part of my re-enlistment bonus, something I'd never mentioned to Sarah either, because I wanted it fully funded before I said a word about it. And about 2 months into the deployment, after a scare where a soldier in another unit passed away and left his young family without enough coverage, I went back through my paperwork and doubled my life insurance policy, listing Sarah and Lily as the sole beneficiaries, just in case something ever happened to me out there. None of that showed up in any conversation we'd had, not because I was hiding it out of guilt or manipulation, but because I wanted her to see it all at once, not piece by piece over a static-filled phone call from across the world. I wanted her to feel it the way I felt it, every time I skipped buying something for myself, so I could send a little more home. The divorce filing moved forward anyway, while I finished out the deployment. Because paperwork and lawyers don't slow down for timing that would actually make sense. About 6 weeks after that first phone call, right around the time the mortgage finally hit zero, I got emergency leave approved through the Red Cross because Sarah's mother had a serious cardiac event and ended up in the hospital. I flew home on almost no notice, still in uniform, straight from the airport to the hospital, where I found Sarah sitting alone in a waiting room chair, eyes red, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen her. She looked up when I walked in, surprise flashing across her face before anything else. "What are you doing here?" "You're not supposed to be back for another few weeks. Your mom needed somebody here," I said. "So did you, whether the paperwork says I'm still your husband or not." She didn't say anything to that, just looked at me for a long moment, something complicated moving behind her eyes. I sat down next to her, not too close, and we waited together in silence until a doctor came out a while later to tell us her mother was stable, going to be okay with some medication adjustments and follow-up care. I brought her a coffee from the vending machine down the hall, black, the way she'd always taken it, and set it down next to her without saying much, just sitting close enough that our shoulders almost touched. She thanked me quietly, and for a little while, neither of us said anything else at all, just watched the doors of the ICU wing, waiting on word about her mom, two people who weren't sure anymore what they were to each other, but who still knew, without needing to say it, how to sit together through something hard. On the drive back to the house afterward, quiet except for the radio playing low, Sarah finally asked the question I could tell had been sitting on her chest the whole ride. "Why'd you really come home so fast, Ryan? The Red Cross message could have waited a day or two, and you still came straight from the plane." "Because you needed somebody there," I said. "And because there's something at the house I think you need to see, now that I'm actually standing in front of you instead of on the other end of a phone." I could tell she didn't fully understand what I meant, but something in my voice must have told her it mattered, because she didn't ask any more questions the rest of the drive. When we got home, I walked straight past the living room, past the boxes she'd already started packing for the move she'd planned once the divorce finalized, and pulled a folder out from under our bed, the same spot where I'd also kept that box I mentioned earlier, the one full of letters I'd written but never sent. I laid the mortgage documents out on the kitchen table first, the zero balance statement, the payoff confirmation letter from the bank, dated just 2 weeks earlier, then the paperwork for Lily's college fund, already sitting at $15,000 after 9 months of contributions. Then the updated life insurance policy, coverage doubled to $500,000, her name and Lily's name listed clearly as beneficiaries. Sarah stood there staring at the papers for a long moment, not saying anything at all, her hand slowly coming up to cover her mouth. "You did all this?" she said quietly, "while I was telling you that you weren't showing up for us?" "I wasn't showing up the way you needed," I said. "I know that. I'm not saying this to argue with what you felt, because what you felt was real, and I should have listened harder, instead of getting defensive every time you tried to tell me. But I need you to know, I wasn't gone because I didn't care. I was gone trying to build something that would protect you and Lily no matter what happened to us. I just did it in a way that left you carrying everything alone, and that's on me, not you." I reached under the bed one more time and pulled out the box of letters, setting it on the table next to everything else. "These are for you too," I said. Every night I couldn't get through on the phone, or every time a call went bad and I hung up frustrated, instead of saying what I actually felt, I wrote it down instead. There's about 200 of them in there. I was going to give you the whole box when I got home for good. I still want you to have it, whatever happens between us now. Sarah pulled a chair out and sat down slowly, running her fingers over the edge of the ammo can, not opening it yet, just sitting with the weight of everything spread out on our kitchen table. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "You could have told me any of this, any single piece of it. Why keep it all a secret while I was sitting at home thinking you didn't care enough to even call me back some nights?" "Because I didn't want it to sound like I was buying my way out of being present," I said, and my voice cracked a little saying it out loud for the first time. "I kept thinking if I told you about the money, you'd think I was trying to fix things with a bank account instead of actually showing up the way you needed. So I just kept quiet and kept working, telling myself I'd explain it all at once, when I could actually be standing in front of you saying it, not just texting it from somewhere you couldn't picture." She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the payoff letter from the bank, the numbers on the page probably feeling as unreal to her as the divorce papers had felt to me back in that tent. "I filed because I felt like I was raising our daughter alone," she finally said. "I felt like every time I needed you, you were somewhere I couldn't reach, and I didn't know anymore if that was ever going to change, no matter how many more years we tried to make this work." "I know," I said, "and I'm not trying to argue you out of feeling that way, because you're right. I wasn't there enough, and no amount of money in a bank account changes that. I just needed you to know it wasn't because I stopped caring. It was because I cared so much I convinced myself the wrong way to show it." Sarah didn't say much that night. She took the box of letters into our bedroom and closed the door, and I slept on the couch, not sure what any of it meant for us going forward, just grateful I'd gotten the chance to show her the truth before the divorce finalized and I lost the chance completely. Over the following 2 weeks, while I finished out the last stretch of my emergency leave, she read through those letters slowly, a few at a time, some nights coming out to the living room afterward with red eyes, not saying much, just sitting near me on the couch in a way that felt like something starting to thaw. We didn't stop the divorce filing right away. Sarah told me honestly that seeing what I'd done financially didn't erase years of feeling alone, and I respected that more than I think she expected me to. She said something that night I've never forgotten, sitting across from me at that same kitchen table a few days later, once she'd read through maybe 30 of the letters. "I'm not upset about the money, Ryan. I'm upset that it took a divorce filing and a hospital emergency for you to finally show me all of this at once. I shouldn't have had to almost lose you to actually see you." I didn't have a good response to that, because she was right, and I think some part of me had known it the whole time I was working that plan in secret, telling myself I'd explain it perfectly once I got the chance. What it did do was open up conversations we probably should have been having for years, real ones, about what we each actually needed, about whether the army life was something we could keep building a marriage around, or whether it was quietly breaking something neither of us wanted to admit was breaking. We started counseling together about a month later, first through a program on base for military families, then with a civilian counselor once I extended my leave with command's approval to work through things properly. It wasn't easy. Where old resentments came up sharp and ugly, years of built-up loneliness on her side, years of feeling unseen and unappreciated on mine. Our counselor, a soft-spoken woman named Diane who'd worked with military couples for almost 2 decades, told us early on that our situation wasn't rare at all, that she'd sat across from dozens of couples where one partner was quietly sacrificing in ways the other couldn't see, and where that invisible sacrifice ended up doing almost as much damage as if it had never happened at all. That stuck with me. It made me realize good intentions carried out in silence can still hurt somebody just as badly as no intentions at all. We kept showing up anyway, week after week, which honestly felt like its own kind of deployment some days, hard and exhausting, and worth it in ways I couldn't always see clearly until we'd made it through another session. Lily came with us sometimes, to a separate room down the hall where a child counselor helped her work through her own confusion about why Mommy and Daddy were seeing a doctor together, even though nobody was sick. She started sleeping better after a few of those sessions, according to Sarah, which told me more about how much she'd been picking up on our tension than either of us had wanted to admit. Kids notice more than we ever give them credit for, even the ones too young to have the words for what they're noticing. About 4 months after I came home for good, Sarah asked me to put the divorce filing on hold while we kept working on things, not fully withdrawn yet, but paused, a decision she made carefully, rather than rushing back into anything just because a spreadsheet full of numbers had moved her. I understood that, and honestly, I respected it more than if she'd just forgiven everything the second she saw the mortgage statement. Trust isn't something a bank balance can rebuild on its own. It takes actual time, actual showing up, actual choosing each other on the hard days, not just the easy ones. It's been almost a year now since that hospital waiting room. The divorce filing officially got withdrawn about 7 months ago, both of us signing the paperwork together at the same lawyer's office where the original filing started, which felt like its own kind of full-circle moment neither of us planned but both of us needed. I put in for a different assignment after that deployment ended, something closer to a training role stateside that keeps me home a lot more than the operational units I used to serve with. It meant stepping back from some career opportunities I used to care a lot about. But honestly, watching Lily grow up in real time instead of through video calls has turned out to be worth more than any promotion I gave up to get there. Sarah finished her nursing degree last spring, something she'd put off for years while managing everything else on her own, and I sat in the front row at her pinning ceremony with Lily on my lap, both of us cheering loud enough that Sarah told us afterward we embarrassed her a little, though she was smiling the whole time she said it. The box of letters still sits on our dresser now, and every few months, Sarah picks a random one out and reads it out loud to me over dinner, usually one from some rough night overseas where I was missing home so badly I could barely see straight to write. We laugh about some of them now. Some of them still make her cry a little. The good kind of crying. The kind that comes from finally feeling fully seen by somebody after years of feeling invisible. Sarah's mother recovered well from that cardiac event, and she comes over most Sundays now for dinner, usually bringing some dessert she insists on making from scratch even though we tell her every time she doesn't have to. Last month she pulled me aside in the kitchen while Sarah was putting Lily to bed and told me quietly that she'd always known, deep down, that I loved her daughter. Even during the year everybody thought our marriage was ending for good. Some men show love with words, she said. You've always shown it with your hands, even from thousands of miles away. She just needed you to show her the receipts eventually, so to speak. I laughed at that, mostly because it was true, in a way I never would have put into words myself. Danny came to visit us last summer, driving 4 hours down with his wife and their new baby, and one evening after dinner, sitting out on the back porch with a couple beers, he brought up that conversation we'd had in the chow hall all those months earlier. Best advice I ever gave anybody, and I almost didn't say it, he told me, laughing. You looked so far gone that night, I almost figured there was nothing left to fix. I told him he had no idea how close he'd actually been to write about that, and we both got quiet for a second, letting that sit before Sarah came out with more drinks and changed the subject to something lighter. Lily's 7 now, old enough to understand a little bit about what almost happened, though we've kept most of the details age-appropriate for her. She knows her parents went through a hard time and worked through it together, and honestly, I think that's a good enough lesson for a 7-year-old to carry with her. Better than most kids get the chance to learn early. She still asks sometimes why Daddy has a box of letters on the dresser, and Sarah usually tells her it's proof that some kinds of love don't disappear just because two people can't always be in the same room together. Lily seems satisfied with that answer, mostly because it comes with a story about a letter every time she asks, and she loves stories more than almost anything else in the world. I think about that email a lot still, the one that showed up on my phone screen in a dark tent halfway across the world. I think about how close I came to losing everything that actually mattered to me while I was busy trying to build something I thought would prove how much I cared. I don't regret paying off that mortgage, or building Lily's college fund, or doubling that insurance policy. I just regret not finding a way to let Sarah see all of it happening in real time, instead of handing it to her all at once on a kitchen table, the same week I almost lost the chance to hand her anything at all. These days, when guys in my unit start talking about deployment plans, about extra shifts and combat pay, and all the ways they're going to take care of their families from a distance, I try to tell them what Danny told me that night in the chow hall, and what my mom told me on the phone. Providing and showing up aren't the same thing, and a family needs both, not just one dressed up to look like the other. Some of the younger guys look at me like I'm overstepping, and maybe I am, but I'd rather say it out loud and have somebody roll their eyes than stay quiet and watch another marriage almost fall apart the way mine nearly did, over a silence that could have been filled with one honest conversation a long time before any divorce paperwork ever got involved. If this story got to you the way it got to me telling it, drop one word in the comments below, whatever this story means most to you right now. Love, sacrifice, second chances. Whatever hits you first, that's the one I want to see down there. Because at the end of the day, this story was never really about a house getting paid off, or a life insurance policy, or even a divorce filing that almost went all the way through. It was about two people learning, the hard way, that showing love and feeling loved aren't always the same thing, and that sometimes the people fighting hardest for us are doing it in ways we can't see until somebody finally lays the truth out on the kitchen table. Ryan almost lost his marriage while trying to protect it in a way his wife couldn't see from 7,000 miles away, and it took a hospital waiting room and a box of unsent letters to finally close that distance for good. And if this story reminded you that love sometimes needs to be seen, not just felt, subscribe. I'll see you there.